What is that girl to him? She's not his blood. Why is he so considerate? I heard he even bathed her? Yeah, I heard they're not related by blood. And his daughter is all grown up, how strange. Seeing him push his wheelchair around makes me shiver. In this day and age. Who would believe it? He's old and still. That's what the neighbors said about Emily and her grandfather. Why did they say that? Was it right or wrong for the grandfather to help his 16-year-old granddaughter bathe? Listen to today's story. Listen to the end. I'm sure you'll be surprised and learn many lessons from this story. That Thanksgiving, the family decided to drive to the suburbs near Boston to visit their mother's best friend. The snow was falling harder than expected. Emily sat in the backseat, headphones on, half drawn, drawing a picture of a snow fox running through the woods. It all happened in a matter of seconds. A truck lost control and skidded across the opposite lane. A horn blared. Tires screeched on the icy road. Then a terrible crash. The sound of crushed metal, of shattered glass, of life abruptly cut short. Their car was thrown, spinning several times before it landed on its side on the side of the road. Then darkness. Emily woke up in a bright white room. The smell of antiseptic filled her nostrils. Her head was pounding. Her ears were ringing. She couldn't feel anything from the waist down. Emily? A gentle female voice sounded beside her. It was the nurse. The girl tried to move her legs. There was no response. She looked down and realized she was lying on a hospital bed, covered up to her chest with a blanket, an IV in her arm, and surrounded by machines beeping steadily. "Where are your parents?" she asked, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with worry. The nurse's eyes were sad. She hesitated. "The accident was serious. My dear, you're the only one who survived." Emily didn't understand right away. Her heart skipped a beat, then pounded rapidly. Tears began to well up. No, it can't be. The next few days passed like an endless nightmare. The doctors diagnosed severe spinal cord injury leading to paralysis of the lower half of her body, with a very low chance of recovery. Emily couldn't walk, couldn't go to the bathroom, couldn't sit up by herself. A 16-year-old girl who lost her parents and both legs in an instant. Her father's relatives were scattered and had little contact. No one wanted to take responsibility. The local authorities began the process of placing Emily in a juvenile detention center, until a man appeared. George, Emily's step-grandfather, was the only person on the records who was still alive. He was the second husband of his long-dead grandmother, and he lived alone in a remote rural area in Ohio, hundreds of miles from New York. He had no children, lived as a farmer, and had not seen Emily since she was a baby. But when he heard the news, he set off immediately. The door to the hospital room opened. A thin, white-haired man with dusty shoes stepped in. He wore a gray wool cap and an old but clean coat. His eyes were sad but bright. "You're Emily, right?" His voice was soft, hoarse but warm. Emily nodded, saying nothing. She was too exhausted to cry. He came closer, pulled a chair to sit by the bed, his calloused hands placed lightly on the bed as if afraid to hurt her. "I'm George, your mother's grandfather. Your mother used to call me Pops. Now, if you don't mind, you can call me Grandpa." She looked at him for a long time. Her heart was both confused and lost. But then, there was something in his eyes that made her unable to look away. Patience, sincerity, and something very much like family. A few days later, the paperwork was complete. Emily officially left the hospital. George's old pickup truck was parked in front of the door. The back was filled with warm blankets, bags, and a hospital-supported wheelchair. On the way out of the city, Emily looked out the car window. The streets, the skyscrapers, everything slowly drifted away. Childhood, family, dreams, left behind like an unfinished painting. She didn't know what was waiting for her ahead. She only knew that he, a man not related by blood, had not turned his back. And she was still alive. George's old pickup truck rolled down the long country roads. The sky was gray, the clouds low, carrying the chill of winter that was biting into her skin. Emily sat in the backseat, wrapped in a thick down blanket. Her wheelchair was right next to her. As quiet as she was. It was a long way from New York to Ohio. But for Emily, the distance was even greater. She wasn't just leaving the city, she was leaving her life. Her loved ones, and the person she had once been. George glanced at her in the rearview mirror every now and then. He didn't say much, just playing some country music softly. Just enough to break the heavy silence. His house was in a small suburb of Tuscarawas County, Ohio, a place of red dirt, vast grasslands, and 20 miles from the nearest supermarket. Just outside the gate was a peeling white picket fence, a bare maple tree, and a small cowshed in the back garden. As the car turned onto the cobblestone drive, Emily frowned. Everything was so different, so quiet, so rustic, and so foreign. Mr. George got out first, opened the back door, and gently lifted Emily out as if she were a child. She turned away, not wanting to see the pitying gaze of the stranger, no matter how kind he was. "You're lighter than I thought," he smiled, breathing softly, "but I'll take care of you from now on. Don't worry." She didn't answer. Her lips were pressed together. His cabin had 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a kitchen, and an old bathroom. He had cleaned Emily's room thoroughly, clean sheets, windows facing the fields, and a vase of dried flowers on the table. He placed Emily neatly on the low wooden bed, then carefully brought in the wheelchair. "Just say if you need anything. I'll always be in the next room." That night, he cooked chicken porridge, not knowing when. The smell of green onions, the fragrant smell of hot bone broth made Emily choke. That bowl of porridge not only warmed her stomach, it also warmed her loneliness. In the early days, Emily had to relearn how to survive. She couldn't do anything by herself. She couldn't turn around, couldn't get dressed, couldn't go to the bathroom by herself. She needed him for everything. At first, she felt extremely ashamed. A 16-year-old girl, without parents, had to let an old man, not related by blood, help her to the toilet, bathe, and wipe her body. She used to be grumpy, used to cry, used to say, "I can do it myself." But after trying, there were only more tears and pain. Mr. George never blamed her. Every morning, he got up before dawn, lit the stove, cooked. Every night, he helped her massage her numb legs, chatting aimlessly so she wouldn't feel abandoned. "My mother broke her arm when she learned to ride a bike," he said one night. "I had to learn to braid her hair and dress her with one hand. At first, it was awkward, and we just laughed." Emily lay still, tears soaking her pillow. She had never heard him mention her mother before, at least not in such a loving tone. One quiet, blue afternoon, she sat by the window looking out, a blanket covering her legs, a paintbrush on her pillow. She regained some feeling in her knees, even if it was vague. Outside, Mr. George was repairing the broken fence. His movements were slow, his back bent, but still sure. Emily looked at him for a long time. He was the only one who didn't turn his back on her. No strings attached, no obligation, and yet she stayed. She whispered, not sure if he could hear her, "Thank you." That night, Mr. George paused while washing the dishes. She sat in her wheelchair next to the stove, watching him do it, something she never thought she would do. "What did you call me?" he asked. Turning around, she hesitated. "Grandpa." He smiled, his old eyes shining with emotion. "Thank you." Life was still hard, but in every small step, from learning to use a wheelchair to shedding tears of helplessness, Emily began to change. Outside the simple wooden house, the snow began to melt, and somewhere in her heart, a tiny seed of hope began to sprout. The first month in the country passed with cold mornings and long, restless nights. Emily grew accustomed to the slow pace of life, to the early morning crowing of roosters, the late afternoon mooing of cows, and to the steady presence of George, whom she now began to call Grandpa without hesitation. Every day, he pushed her wheelchair out onto the porch, letting her sit and watch the garden, or draw the peaceful countryside scenery. She began to learn to do small things for herself, like holding a spoon, combing her hair, transferring herself from bed to wheelchair, albeit very slowly. The closeness between them grew, and it was this that began to attract the attention of the neighbors. One morning, while George was out shopping, Emily was sitting alone on the porch when she heard 2 women talking on the other side of the fence. Their voices were not loud, but they were not trying to be discreet. "What is that girl to him? She's not his blood," Why is she so attentive? I heard she even bathes her? Yeah, I heard they're not blood related. And the daughter is grown up, it's weird. It makes me cringe to see him pushing the wheelchair around. Who would believe that these days? Even when you're old. The last sentence made Emily feel like someone had slapped her in the face. She froze, her heart pounding. Her hands gripped the wheelchair until they turned white. They didn't know she heard. Or worse, they knew, and they meant for her to hear. That night, Emily didn't eat much. She was silent, pushing the bowl of porridge towards him. Are you not feeling well? He asked. Worried, she just shook her head. But her eyes were red. He knew something was wrong. At night, when she went to bed, he still sat silently by the fire for a long time, holding a cup of cold tea. She did not hear him complain, but his thin shoulders were bent, as if he were carrying something heavier than old age. A few days later, Emily saw him fix the curtain in the bathroom, replacing it with a thicker, more closed one. He also began to avoid bathing her, letting her do what she could, only guiding her from afar. She knew he had heard the rumors. Another day, when he was massaging her feet as usual, his hands suddenly stopped. He looked out the window, his voice low and sad. You know, when my grandmother died, I thought I would live alone for the rest of my life. Quiet, no one needed me, no one to take care of me. Emily turned her head, tears filled his eyes. But then, you came. Like a remnant of the family I once had. I don't care what people say. As long as you feel safe here. That's enough. Emily reached out and placed her hand on his wrinkled hand. Hers was small, soft, and fragile, but for the first time, it clasped with trust. She looked into his eyes, which were stained by time but still strangely bright in the oil lamplight. Thank you for not leaving me behind. Her voice trembled, as if each word was squeezed from the deepest part of her heart. And then, she smiled slightly, calling for the first time. Thank you, Grandpa. Mr. George was stunned. His eyes seemed unable to believe what he had just heard. His lips moved, as if he wanted to say something. But in the end he just nodded. Very slowly, a tear rolled down his cheek, wrinkled by the sun, wind, and years of loneliness. Thank you too, Emily. From that day on, they didn't need many words anymore. Just the mornings when he took her out to the garden. The simple but warm dinners. And the glances they exchanged were enough to know that they weren't alone. Emily started drawing again, no longer landscapes or animals like before, but memories. She drew his hand massaging his emotionless feet. She drew his back in the afternoon fields. She drew the sad, but kind eyes of the only person who had never turned his back on her. One day, when he was hanging clothes in the yard, Emily called him over and showed him her latest drawing. It was a picture of the two of them sitting by the fire. The warm light shining on their faces. In the bottom corner was a small line she had written in black ink. Blood doesn't make us family. Love does. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does. He finished reading, and was silent for a long time. Then he turned, put his hand on her head, and stroked it gently. You make me believe in life again. Although the rumors didn't disappear completely, Emily was no longer hurt by them as before. Neither was Mr. George. They understood that outsiders don't live their lives, and they can't understand what true, unconditional love is like. Inside that simple wooden house, love took root, and from their wounds, they gradually became family, in their own beautiful way. The gentle rays of early spring sunlight filtered through the window, illuminating Emily's still tired face. She was practicing a simple exercise, lifting her right foot off the bed, just a few inches. But her foot remained motionless. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her wrists were tired from straining to support her body with her arms. Outside the door, Mr. George watched quietly, not intervening. He was just waiting for her to need him, as always. That morning, he went into town. Emily stayed with her neighbor, Mrs. Sanders, a kind and helpful widow who lived nearby. When he returned at noon, the old truck was no longer full of hay as usual, but only had a strange young man sitting in the passenger seat. He was wearing a white coat, carrying a bag of specialized medical supplies. Emily, this is Dr. Andrew, he introduced. He's a physical therapist. From now on, I'll be here 3 times a week to help you. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. Hire a physical therapist? "But, where do you get the money?" Mr. George just smiled and patted her on the shoulder. "You just need to practice. I'll take care of the rest." She didn't ask any more. But a feeling of unease began to rise in her heart. 2 days later, when he wasn't home, Mrs. Sanders brought Emily a box of cookies and a note attached. "I heard your grandfather just sold all 4 of his cows. And the old tractor. They came and took it away the other day." Emily was stunned. The tractor was the most valuable asset on the farm. He still used it to till the land every season. The cows were the main source of income from milk and meat. She couldn't believe it. Sell your livelihood, just to hire a physical therapist for her? When he returned, she waited for him to finish putting away his things before asking. Her voice was harsher than usual. "You sold everything? For me?" He paused slightly, without looking into her eyes. He just silently hung his coat on the old wooden hanger. "I just did what I thought I needed to do." "Needed to do?" She bit her lip. "Do you think I can live normally again just because of a few sessions? What if after all, I'm still sitting here, unable to walk?" He turned back, his eyes not blaming, just a nameless sadness, light as the wind. "Well, at least you know I never gave up." That night, Emily tossed and turned, unable to sleep. She heard him cough lightly in the next room. Then the creaking sound of turning on the old bed. She thought of his calloused hands, of his back bending after each time he bent down to feed her spoonfuls of porridge, of the mornings when he painstakingly washed the wheelchair, wiping each crack in the wheel with a soft towel. And now, he would have to hoe the ground by hand, instead of using a plow. All for a child who was not of the same blood. A tear fell silently onto her pillow. In the following weeks, Emily began to focus more on therapy. Even though she was tired, even though she was in pain, even though the results were unclear, she still tried, no longer for herself, but for someone who had placed all her trust in her. Andrew, the therapist, was patient. He helped her do each small movement, stimulating each muscle that seemed to have fallen asleep. But then the month passed. Then the 3rd month, Emily's body was still almost motionless from the waist down. She began to get discouraged. One practice session, when Andrew asked her to lift her left leg, she just shook her head. "I'm sorry, I don't have the motivation anymore." "Yes," a deep voice said from the door. It was Mr. George. "You said you were afraid that one day I wouldn't be here. But I'm still here, and I still believe in you." A few weeks later, Andrew took a break and went back to the city. Mr. George decided to take over. Every morning, he helped her practice her movements. Every afternoon, he carried her around the yard as if for a walk. But in reality, he was practicing her sense of balance. Simple, rudimentary exercises, but full of love. At night, when the pain kept Emily from sleeping, he sat on the edge of the bed, massaging her legs for hours, until her eyes closed in tears and exhaustion. One time, when it was pouring rain, he put Emily on his back, put on a raincoat, and carried her around the yard. She leaned her hands on his shoulders, her body wet and cold. "Aren't you afraid of getting sick?" she asked. Her voice choked. He softly replied, "I haven't given up yet. How dare you?" When he returned to the house, he coughed more, but he still said, "I've practiced 3 more steps. Today is a good day." Emily looked at him, the old, thin man, but inside was a heart steadfaster than the mountains around the village. She thought to herself, "If you can sacrifice your whole life to not give up on me, then I won't give up on myself." Summer rains in rural Ohio did not come as gently as they did in the city. They poured down in a torrent of anger, as if the sky were carrying some unspeakable sadness. That evening, the air suddenly became unusually hot. The wind picked up in swirls of dust, and dry leaves rustled on the eaves. Emily sat by the window, watching the dark clouds roll in from the horizon. She sensed something strange in the air, a vague unease she could not name. "Do you want to practice outside? It's going to rain hard now," George said, wrapping her in a towel. "I know," she said softly, "but I also know you won't say no." He laughed and nodded. "You know me," as he did every night. He carried Emily on his back and walked around the yard. It was how they practiced every day, training their balance, getting her legs used to the movement, feeling the weight of their steps, even if it was just over his shoulders. Rain began to patter as they completed the second lap. "We should go in," he said. But Emily gently pressed his shoulders. "Just one more lap. I feel like my knees are acting up today." He hesitated, then nodded. The rain suddenly picked up. The wind whipped across his face. Cold water hit his skin, his clothes, making George's shoulders shiver. But he didn't stop. His steps were steady. Steady. Emily said nothing. She leaned her head against his back, listening to his heartbeat close to her ear. Each beat was slow, steady, the way he lived, the way he loved. But then suddenly, his steps missed a beat. Then another. "Grandpa?" Emily called, feeling his body begin to fall forward. "It's okay," he whispered. "Just a little dizzy." But before he could finish, his head fell forward, his whole body falling to the wet ground. Emily fell with him, hitting his shoulder, her head lightly hitting the cement. She panicked. "Grandpa! Grandpa!" she screamed, trying to turn him over. His face was pale, his lips purple from cold and exhaustion. The rain was pouring down. No one was near. No one heard. Emily shivered, rain and tears mingling. Her hands slid to his forehead, hot. His breathing was weak. She knew she couldn't wait. "Help, help, someone, please." No response. She gritted her teeth. She couldn't call anyone. There was no phone, no neighbors near the yard. Mrs. Sanders's house was at least 200 yards away, and the dirt road was muddy. She looked down at her feet. They were still numb, but her arms were. Her knees were there. She clenched her jaw, took a deep breath, and then, slowly turning, putting her hands on the cold ground, she began to crawl on her knees and elbows. She didn't know how far she could go. All she knew was, she had to save him. Her knees scraped against the rough, rocky ground, burning painfully. Mud clung to her hands. Her wet dress stuck to her skin. Emily gritted her teeth, refusing to stop. The rain beat down on her face, her eyes, making her almost blind. But in her mind, there was only one image: him lying unconscious in the middle of the yard. Alone, in the cold rain. "Hold on," she whispered to herself. "Hold on, for him." The short walk from the yard to Mrs. Sanders's house, which normally took only a minute to walk, now turned into a seemingly endless journey. Every time her hands slipped, her knees hit the rocks. Tears welled up in her eyes from the pain, but she refused to stop. The wind whistled in gusts, making her want to bend over from the cold. But then, a strange surge of strength surged from somewhere, as if all the suppressed willpower had risen up and flowed through her body in hot blood. "Don't leave him alone." She gritted her teeth and crawled a little further. Finally, she saw a flickering light from Mrs. Sanders's window. She screamed hoarsely, "Help, help, my grandfather fainted, help." The lights in the house suddenly turned on. The door was wide open. "Oh my God, Emily!" Mrs. Sanders panicked. "What are you doing?" "He fainted in the yard, heavy rain, please." Without waiting, she immediately ran inside to make a phone call, while her husband, Mr. Harry, grabbed a flashlight and an umbrella and followed Emily back into the yard. They found Mr. George lying on the cement floor, the rain splashing his face. He was still breathing, but very weak. In the rain, Mr. Harry picked him up, called an ambulance and wrapped him in a blanket to keep him warm. Emily was wrapped in a thick blanket. Her knees were bleeding and red, but she still tried to turn her head, asking, "Grandpa, is he still breathing? Is he still breathing?" "Yes, honey, we're here in time." Mrs. Sanders hugged her like a child. At the local hospital, the doctors concluded that George was severely weakened, hypoglycemic and hypothermic, but fortunately there was no damage to his heart or brain. He was given IV fluids, kept warm and given intensive care. Emily sat by the bed, white bandages wrapped around both knees, her hands still shaking slightly. When he woke up, his eyes were rolling around, his voice hoarse. "Are you okay?" She burst into tears, for the first time not out of despair, but out of an indescribable outburst of emotion. "I'm fine, and you? You scared the hell out of me." He chuckled. "Did you go call for help?" She crawled on her knees. He looked at her, his eyes misting. She did something I never dared to believe. A week later, they were back home. It was raining that day too, but it was a light rain, as clear as the first smile of the day. Emily leaned against the side of the car. Then, for the first time, she stood up on her crutches. Mr. George, sitting on the wicker chair, said nothing. He just looked at her. And tears fell again. Not because of worry, but because of something he had never dared to believe would happen in a year. His granddaughter was actually walking. The morning light shone through the frosted glass window, reflecting on Emily's face as she gently placed her wooden crutches on the floor. It was the first morning after being discharged from the hospital. The air was fresher than ever. Not because the rain had stopped, but because she could actually stand up. She didn't walk like a normal person. Not as steadily as in her old dreams, but each time she lifted her leg. It was a declaration. I will not give up. Mr. George was still weak. Every day, he lay on the couch by the window, covered with a blanket and occasionally coughing softly. Although the doctor said he would recover soon, the nearly 70-year-old man's physical condition after that shock was no longer the same. Emily spent the whole day taking care of him, making tea, cooking porridge, warming the room, and telling him about her journey crawling in the rain like a little adventure story. I remember the stones hitting my knees, she said, but I didn't feel any pain. I just thought that if I didn't do anything, he would. She choked up. He just nodded, saying nothing, but his eyes, as always, contained everything that words couldn't convey. From that day on, a new fire seemed to be lit inside Emily. She began to wake up early, doing the old physical therapy exercises that Andrew had taught her. Even without a specialist by her side, she still repeated each movement with stubborn precision and persistence. At first, she could only take a few steps, then 10, then 20, then around the small house. Once, she leaned on crutches and walked out onto the porch to hang clothes. George happened to see her through the window, and he was silent for the next 10 minutes. When Emily returned, she saw him facing the window, his shoulders shaking slightly. He said nothing, but she knew he was crying with joy. To not only practice but also to heal her spirit, Emily began to paint again. She set up her easel right next to the window where he lay, so he could look at her and watch the pictures take shape. No longer sad or dark pictures. Now she painted sunlight filtering through the eaves, George smiling with his morning tea, herself, with her wooden crutches and her eyes filled with sunlight. One day, she brought him her first completed painting, an old man carrying his little granddaughter in the rain. Both soaked but smiling as bright as the sun after a storm. Beneath it, she wrote, "The rain is just a test. Love is the way." He looked at the painting for a long time. Then he said, "The day you came here, I thought I would save you from the abyss. But actually, it was you who pulled me out of the darkness of lonely old age." One afternoon in early autumn, when the yellow leaves began to fall gently on the roof, Emily sat flipping through old sketches from her time living in New York. The drawings were clumsy but full of hope, just like her. Suddenly she laughed softly. In the past, she drew to dream. Now, she drew to live. She sat down at the table, opened her old laptop, and searched for an online art course. Her hands shook as she clicked the registration button. It felt no different from the first time she stood up on crutches, scared, excited, and yearning for something beautiful. That evening, while Mr. George was sipping a cup of warm tea, she said, "I will study professional drawing again. And then, I will open an exhibition. But only paint on one subject." "What subject?" he asked, his voice lazy but curious. "Hope," she replied. From that moment, everything changed. Not a miracle, just a heart that restarted. Emily was no longer the girl paralyzed on one side, sitting motionless by the window. She was the one who crawled through the rain to save the person she loved the most. She was the one who stood up with crutches, with her hands, and with her heart that refused to surrender to fate. One October morning, Emily woke up on her own, leaned on her crutches, opened the window, and breathed in the cool mist drifting over the harvested cornfields. The sky was clear, and the breeze carried the scent of damp earth and dry grass typical of the countryside after the harvest. She turned around, changed her clothes, washed her face, and leaned on her crutches to the kitchen. "Sleep a little longer," she called into George's room. "I made breakfast today." There was no answer, but a moment later, he came out, put on a sweater, and leaned against the window frame, watching his granddaughter as she fried eggs and prepared toast. He said nothing, he just smiled, That smile was different from the first days. It was lighter, more proud, as if he were seeing something beautiful that he had never expected to see. Emily's recovery was no longer a matter of each step, but of each new decision to live. She started doing more for herself, washing clothes, cooking, tending to the small garden behind the house. Although she sometimes had to sit down to rest because of pain or fatigue, she did not give up. Every day was a victory. She spent her afternoons drawing and studying online. In the evenings, she read to Grandpa George, usually classic literature or children's short stories, which made him laugh like a little boy. One day, after listening to a short story by Shel Silverstein, he said, "You should write and draw children's stories." "Really?" Emily looked at him, her eyes shining. "I used to think it was a dream, but now it's different. The dream is not something far away anymore. The dream is something I pursue every day." She began to draw the first illustrations for a self-written story, the story of a little fox who broke her leg in the forest, but still bravely crossed streams and climbed hills, just to bring flowers to her sick grandfather fox. Mr. George looked at each stroke, each line, nodding his head. "Your granddaughter is really extraordinary." She blushed, smiling, but deep down, she knew what he said was true, not because she was perfect, but because she dared to face it, to change, to live. One day, Emily decided to go to town, alone. She got on the minibus that ran from the farm to the town center. Before, Mr. George always went with her, but that day, he stood at the door, leaning on his cane, and said, "Remember to dress warmly, and don't forget to bring a sample if you're going to the bookstore." "Yes, sir," she smiled, grabbing the strap of her crossbody bag. "I'll be back before dark." She went, alone, with crutches and a brave heart. In town, Emily stopped by the small bookstore she had visited with her grandfather several times. Today, she showed her comic book manuscript to the owner, a middle-aged bookworm who used to be an art teacher. "She draws what she knows, what she lives," she commented after seeing it, "and that's what gives her pictures their soul." She offered to connect Emily with a local publisher specializing in illustrated books for children. Emily couldn't believe her ears. She could only mumble, "Thank you very much." On the way home, sitting on the bus, watching the fields recede behind the glass doors, Emily suddenly laughed to herself. She thought she had lost everything. But actually, this was just the beginning. That night, she boiled ginger and honey water for her grandfather, then told him everything. After listening, he just put his hand on her shoulder. "You're not the little girl you used to be. But you're still my Emily." "Yeah," he laughed, "just Emily now knows how to walk, draw, live on her own, and dream for both of us." At the end of the month, the first book was approved for limited edition. Emily, holding the confirmation paper in her hand, ran, slowly on crutches, to the porch, holding it up for Mr. George to see. "I did it." He leaned on his cane and walked out. Trembling, the two of them embraced, bathed in the afternoon sun. At the threshold of the old wooden house, a girl who had once collapsed, who had wanted to disappear from the world, had become a person who could walk on her own, with effort, faith, and unconditional love. The sixth autumn since Emily left the city. The sky was still as blue, the leaves still falling as if they had never changed. But inside the small cabin in the Ohio countryside, time had carved its gentle mark on everything. Emily was 21 now. She no longer used crutches. Her steps were steady, slow but determined, sometimes even a little proud. Her hair was longer, usually tied back when she painted, and in her eyes was the quiet light of someone who had walked through the abyss and returned to the most beautiful things. On the easel was a new sketch for her third picture book. The story of a sparrow learning to fly in a storm. And Mr. George, he had aged visibly. Since that year's fainting spell, his health had been declining over the years. His knees hurt in the cold. His eyesight was getting worse. And recently his doctor had recommended that he use a wheelchair to avoid falling. At first he resisted fiercely. "I don't want you to push me around like you used to do to me." Emily just smiled and whispered, "But I want to do that, Grandpa." The answer silenced him, and then he agreed. The old wheelchair that had belonged to Emily was now refurbished, with a new seat cushion and new wheels. Emily had tied a blue ribbon to the handle, his favorite color. Every morning, Emily woke up early, made ginger tea, and prepared breakfast. Then she pushed his wheelchair out onto the porch, where they watched the sun rise behind the maple trees. Mr. George didn't say much anymore, but his eyes looked at Emily with pride, like a farmer looking at a field after harvest. One time, he quietly said, "Do you know, when I carried you here from the hospital, I never thought that one day I would see you walking like this?" Emily took his hand and squeezed it gently. "And I never thought that there would be someone who would sacrifice his whole life to believe in something that I didn't even dare to believe." Their life is now peaceful, but not boring. Emily opened a small art class at home, teaching a few children in the area. Everyone called George, Grandpa George, and he enjoyed telling old stories, explaining about plants, animals, and how to raise dairy cows and make handmade butter. Once, when Emily asked, "If you could choose your life again, would you choose to live alone on a farm?" he smiled, shaking his head slightly. "No, I would choose to have you from the beginning." That winter, Emily applied to open a rehabilitation and arts center for disabled children, a model that combined creativity and therapy. She took inspiration from her own journey with Mr. George. The name of the center was Light After Rain. When the license was approved, she ran home with the approval. Just as she had held up the first publication confirmation, Mr. George could no longer stand up, but he reached out and pulled her closer. "You know, I can't just walk, I can take the world with me." That evening, Emily sat quietly by the window. Watching the garden lights, she drew Mr. George sitting in a wheelchair among a group of children, next to a young girl guiding them to color on a white wall. Above the sky and the painting, she drew a small rainbow, something she believed always appeared after the rain, even though sometimes no one could see it. Spring came slowly. The first flowers bloomed just in time for his birthday. Emily prepared a small party. A few friends, a few students, homemade apple pie, and a song he liked. When everyone left, she pushed him to the back of the house, where a low slope led up to a high mound. The wind blew gently, carrying the smell of damp earth and early flowers. At the top of the slope, the two of them stopped. Before them was a vast meadow, the sun rising silently over the horizon, red, yellow, orange, sparkling. "Remember," he said softly, "when I carried you in the rain? Now you push me into the sun. That's only fair." Emily smiled, her eyes red. "No, Grandpa, if it were fair, you'd have to live another life." They sat there. In that quiet moment no more words needed to be said, because true love is always full in silence. It wasn't quite light when Emily woke. She didn't need an alarm clock. For years, whenever she felt a special moment approaching, her body would wake her gently as the wind on leaves. She put on her coat, slipped her feet into soft canvas shoes, and walked quietly into George's room. He was still sleeping, his breathing even, deep and light like someone dreaming something peaceful. On the bedside table was the book she'd read to him the night before, marked on the page with the picture of the fox and his granddaughter watching the sunrise. She chuckled. Today was the day. Less than half an hour later, George was wrapped warmly in a thick coat, his woolen hat carefully on, his scarf tightly wrapped around his neck. Emily pushed the wheelchair down the familiar dirt path that led to the back of the farm, where there was a round hill they affectionately called Breeze Hill. It was also the place where he used to carry her to practice every morning, where he used to collapse in the rain, where Emily used to crawl on her knees to call for help. And now, it was the place where they returned together. "Are you sure it's not slippery?" he asked, squinting at the foggy path. "I checked it carefully yesterday." Emily laughed. "You can trust me. I'm a good driver." "That's right," he sighed. "I couldn't even get up by myself before. But now I'm dragging you around. You used to carry me around on your back too." They both laughed. Their laughter echoed in the fog, fading away like the smoke from the morning tea. When they reached the top of the hill, the sun had just appeared behind the trees in the distance. The red glow gradually spread out, mixed with a soft golden light like honey, warming the sky still covered in cold fog. Emily stopped the car, stood still, stunned by the scene. She didn't know how many times she had dreamed of this moment when she and Grandpa would watch the sunrise together. But she would push him away. No longer being pushed, she turned to look at him. He wasn't looking at the sun. He was looking at her. "You've grown so much," he said. "You've only grown a little taller." "No, not in height," he smiled. "You've grown, in your eyes. In your heart." Emily didn't know what to say. She lowered her head, hiding the corners of her eyes that were starting to moisten. "Grandpa," she whispered, "that day, when you carried me in the rain, were you scared?" He was silent for a moment. "Yes, scared. Afraid that I couldn't hold you. Afraid that you were a burden. Afraid that I would grow old before I could see you recover. And yet you didn't stop. Because you know, if you don't move on, I won't believe in anyone anymore. And if I lose faith, you lose me." Emily gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. The sun was getting brighter, warmer, shining on her face. She raised her head. "Now I believe in you, believe in myself, and I won't stop." The two of them sat in silence for a long time, neither saying anything more. Each was lost in their own thoughts, but it seemed like their thoughts were going in tandem, pointing to the same thing: the journey they had just passed, and the journey they were about to take. After a while, Emily stood up, walked to the front of the wheelchair, turned around, and faced him. "You know," she said, "I used to wish I could walk again, draw again, live again, but now I think differently. Now I wish I could live slowly, to enjoy every second of walking, drawing, loving, and you." She bent down, placing her hand on his. "You are the best thing I've ever known." Mr. George said nothing. He just raised his hand and touched her cheek lightly, a gesture he had done hundreds of times since she had been bedridden. The only difference was that this time, she was no longer weak, no longer helpless. She was the one standing firm, and he was the one sitting back, resting peacefully. The sun was high in the sky, clearing away all the mist from the fields. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of young rice and wild flowers. In that light, the shadows of the two of them stretched out on the grass. Emily pushed the wheelchair back down the hill, slowly as if it were a ritual. Neither of them said anything more, because when love is full, silence is the deepest expression. On the doorstep, before entering the house, Mr. George turned his head to look at the grass again. "You know," he said, his voice barely a breath, "I used to think, if I could see you walk, I could go away at any time." Emily squeezed his hand. "But I'm not going anywhere. I haven't finished building my treatment center yet. I need you sitting in the doorway, yelling at kids who broke their crayons. I need you to tell this story to as many people as possible." He smiled, closing his eyes. "Then, I'll be here for a long time." And then they turned back, their shadows, one old, one young, blending into the sunlight that flooded the old house. A story that doesn't need blood. A love that doesn't need ties. Just the heart. Emily and George's story reminds us that love doesn't have to be tied by blood. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who are there for you when the world turns its back. And that, when someone believes in you more than you believe in yourself, that's the most magical thing in the world. Thank you for accompanying us throughout the 9 chapters of this journey. In the near future, we will continue on a new story together, also full of emotions, but a different journey. Unlocked Doors, where a young man with amnesia gradually finds his past through the doors of a strange house, and each love story behind each door. If you love healing, seemingly fragile relationships that are a solid support, then don't miss it. See you in the next episode. Daily Unexpected Stories Team.